maybe this is where we can touch on spiral dynamics. I'll give just a brief overview, and you can add anything you like. Spiral dynamics is, from my understanding, it was made by this guy, Clare Graves, and it was his based on studies of a lot of different people and what they understood about their developmental psychology at different periods in their life. And it also tracked sort of almost with an upper limit that few people exceeded in any given time period with where a society was at a certain stage. So you might say that earlier stages were very tribalistic and warlike. Then you enter into this medieval, listen to the church dogmatism. You evolve into this capitalist individualism, into what you might call more socialist, care about everyone in the environment, and then beyond into things that I really can't describe because they don't exist in governments. They exist mostly in people, which is stage yellow and stage turquoise. And all of these stages are color-coded. So that's spiral dynamics. Is there anything you want to add to that before we sort of talk about it?
Yeah, it was based on the works of Clare Graves, but also popularized by Don Beck and Christopher Cohen, so they deserve some credit for that. They're academics who actually wrote the spiral dynamics book and trademarked that name. But yeah, it's based on the works of Clare Graves. But yeah, that's a good summary. Basically, what I would add to that is that it turns out that when you start to study the value systems of humans across the world, which Clare Graves did in like the 60s, 1960s, he was sort of shocked to discover that there's a certain consistent progression and order to these different value systems. And there's not that many different value systems. And this is not just something that's part of Western culture. Really, it applies around the entire world. And so he developed this developmental psychological model where you can actually track and see how one's cognitive development or moral development or spiritual development evolves over time and becomes more sophisticated and complex, and better able to deal with the complexities of our evolving society and culture. And so he mapped that out, and then the spiral dynamics guys, they color-coded it and called it spiral dynamics. And so we have these different stages. These stages are sort of, you might think of them as evolutions of the human psyche. The human psyche becomes more refined and nuanced in order to deal with more complexity. So like if we go back 2,000 years, you can imagine that most people, they weren't very educated. Their psyches were not very well developed in the sense that it was a much more brutal way of surviving, like the sort of spiral dynamic stage red, as they call it, where we had dictators and tyrants, and we had slavery, and we had feudal warlords. And so basically the way societies were structured 2,000 years ago, like I'm thinking of like the ancient Roman times, is that whoever had the largest army would just conquer and rape and pillage the neighboring town. And that was their way of surviving. And that was considered acceptable. There was not even, at that time, even the idea of a morality that said that that's wrong or bad, that didn't even really exist. It took that, people don't realize, that had to be evolved and developed over time. Culture had to refine itself to such a level where people realized, like, wait a minute, like, raiding and raping and pillaging a neighboring city, that's evil? Like, that didn't compute for most people for a long time. Mm-hmm. But then, we evolved beyond that, and we got into like the Middle Ages, and then we got into like the Renaissance era, and then we got into like Industrial Revolution and so forth. And as that kept happening, the mind became more sophisticated, it became more scientific, it became less dogmatic, less superstitious, less mystical, we might say. And that evolution is still continuing to this day. And this is happening collectively as a society. It's happening individually in different countries. But it's also happening in different organizations, depending what company you're working at. Companies have different spiral stages, and it's happening individually within you. I mean, throughout your own life, you can sort of see how your own psyche evolved. You might have, like, when you were a teenager, for example, you might have been very rebellious in school. You might have, like, fought with authority figures and, done drugs and had difficulty disciplining yourself, but then you evolved beyond that, you outgrew that phase, and then you developed some discipline, and then you developed some work ethic, and you started caring about being a nice person, where before you were an asshole, you realized being an asshole doesn't work so well, it's not good for me, not good for them. So you evolve, and then you can continue that evolution.
Mm-hmm. Great. So, let's talk, I want to talk about, I have like an interested but frustrated relationship with spiral dynamics. I'm curious what you think. So things that I enjoy about it is that it it says that you can't just go to Iraq and give them democracy. And I really enjoy that aspect of it, that there's not a place that everyone is supposed to be, and you can't just teleport different cultures, different individuals with different backgrounds to where you might think is the preferred place for them to be, that there are stages that people must go through in order to get to what might be some of the more peaceful, harmonious stages. But if you try to skip them too quickly, you just create more chaos. And so I like that aspect of it, because I think oftentimes we just view it almost on a spectrum. It's like, here we are. There's freedom on one side, there's tyranny on the other, and we just want to crank everybody right on over to freedom. And that is foolhardy, and just it gets people hurt and killed, even worse than than before potentially. So I really like that aspect of it. Something that I've struggled with, though, is that even as I look at my own life, it sometimes feels hard for me to chart myself on this particular thing, because I feel like, when I was 20, I was like what you would appear to be green on the outside, like super into the, we got to help everybody, and, multicultural, and I traveled abroad and learned a bunch of languages, and had to mix and mingle. And now I find myself, perhaps it's after having done some business, sometimes it's more orange, more yellow sometimes, with an understanding of what you might call the value of some of the exploitive capitalist systems that exist out there, that I previously was just like, this is just mean people taking advantage of the downtrodden. And now I go, oh, this was like the best solution at the time. So I find myself yanked to either side of green in my own life, is what I would say. And so I'm curious if that resonates with you, or what you think of that.
Yeah,
I find myself not really landing or going through green in a meaningful way, and just instead like yellow or orange, which for those people who don't know, orange is individualist, entrepreneurial, capitalist, but can be very selfish. Green is very multicultural, almost to a fault, where it's like there are no right answers, and like
yeah,
and then yellow,
social justice warriors is
yes.
green. Yeah.
And then yellow is systematic, has an understanding of everything that comes before it, and starts to see the value of the previous stages, and recognizes that there's not just one simple solution, one size fits all. So I'm curious if you've experienced that in your own life, or anything like skipping stages, or finding some of them hard to really sink into.
Oh yeah, I can help you to make sense of that. So, you see, first of all, it has to be said that the spiral dynamics model is very, very complicated. So like, to really understand how it fully works, it's such a complex model, it can take 20, 30, 50 hours of studying it to really understand it. So we're going through it really fast, and also because of this, it takes time to really get a good sense of it. So when you first start, you do have difficulty placing people in certain categories. You're not quite sure where they fit. And also, it should be said that spiral dynamics does not simplistically say that you're only in one category. It says that you fall into a range of different categories with different sort of, like, you can do a chart where you can say, like, well, you've got this much green and this much orange and this much yellow, a little bit of yellow, whatever. You can do kind of like a bar chart for different people. So that explains part of the answer is that nobody is at any one color stage. We scatter along, and we have a certain center of gravity, and then there's sort of a bell curve distribution sort of away from that center of gravity. So if you're at like, high green, low yellow, let's say, then yeah, you're still going to have plenty of green. You're still going to have plenty of orange in there probably, and maybe a little smattering of turquoise when you're experiencing psychedelics, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like that. But also, see, it's very much a cultural phenomenon too, because what they say in the book is that really these stages are memes. They're meme complexes, and memes are just they're basically collections of ideas. So the reason that when you were in your early 20s, you were heavily into the green meme complex, which is the social justice warrior sort of philosophy, trying to create equality for people, democracy, egalitarianism, maybe socialism, maybe a bit of Marxism, this sort of stuff, all the stuff Jordan Peterson rails against, all of that stuff. You were into that because probably the culture, the place, I don't know where you grew up, but the
I
area
was in Washington, D.C. in college.
Right, exactly. So that explains it. So like you grew up in an area where that was the predominant culture. And your friends were probably in it, your family was probably somewhat in it, and so you got immersed into that, and you just picked up these memes. You didn't think about them very deeply, and you didn't derive them from first principles or from direct experience. You mostly just kind of gleaned it from your professors, from your friends, from the media you watched, and so forth. And so you got all that. And, I got a lot of that too, because I grew up like in Southern California. Environmentalism and all recycling, you just pick this stuff up. Like if you're living in Southern California, everyone's recycling and talking about recycling. So it's like, that's what you're supposed to do. And then when you move to like Alabama or someplace and nobody's recycling there and they look at you weird for wanting to recycle, you're like, what's going on here? There's like a cultural disconnect. Well, that's it. That's the cultural disconnect. So anyways, you do that, but then you start to study more. And as you get more experience, you start to question some of these memes, and then you start to actually rederive them from your own direct experiences. And sometimes what you discover is that, this meme went too far. It was too idealistic. It was just a philosophy. It was just an idea. It wasn't really connected or grounded in anything. And then, so maybe you go into business, you start a business and you realize, capitalism is not this evil thing that these green, socialists, told me it was. When I started actually doing it, I realized, business is actually very difficult. It is a survival game. And, there's pros and cons to it. It's much more nuanced than just simply, earning a profit is evil. Mm-hmm. It's much more complicated than that. And so now you kind of almost regress a stage, but you're not really regressing. It's that you're sort of deepening your understanding of each stage. Each stage is very deep. And you can even go back to blue, for example. You might start to run your business and you might realize I have difficulty waking up in the morning and disciplining myself to work on my business because I'm kind of lazy. I don't want to play video games and so forth. And then you realize, that's because I'm missing important aspects from stage blue, which is also what Jordan Peterson, this is what he sort of preaches positively, is all the positive aspects of stage blue, which is discipline, morality, ethics, character, loyalty, doing the hard work rather than playing games and stuff like that. And so you adopt some of those attitudes that you were missing because you grew up in an environment that didn't really teach you blue properly. And then you integrate that. And so the whole idea with this model is that it can help you to integrate these different important foundational aspects of your psyche. And it's not that one stage is better than another stage. It's that every stage builds on top of the other stage.
It also
so you're not abandoning blue or orange when you go green if you do it properly. You're integrating them. And there are healthy and unhealthy ways of manifesting these different memes and stages. You can go too far and they can become toxic. And this is what all the culture war these days is about in our political discussions, is it's all about each side is basically blaming the other side's excesses and toxic aspects while ignoring the healthy aspects.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds like from what I'm hearing from you is that, at least in my own life, there's been value towards rederiving the principles and values of each stage firsthand as opposed to being lectured about them, which was, my understanding of everything up until I was out there in the world doing it was as it was told to me. There was very little firsthand, let me try this out and bang into something and see, that's why discipline's important, or, that's why capitalism is important, or, that's why even social justice is important. It was much more, they were, as you said, not really like green in college, as I look back on it, was not a deep understanding of the inequality in the world and a self-reflective nature. It was almost this blue, and by blue I mean like dogmatic, fit in, all pray to the same God, and that God just happened to be named multiculturalism or wokeness. And so I guess where I am at in my own life, and I think it feels appropriate, especially with some of the psychedelic, is like I got to go do green the right way. Like I got to go rederive it for myself, because I did travel and I did do these things, and I see intellectually the value of a lot of these things, but I do think I need to land in it, as cheesy as it sounds, and I would never have used this phrase, from a heart-first, heart-centered place, which is not where I was coming from, and I don't think where a lot of the rhetoric around wokeness and social justice is often coming from. Yeah,
that's green is actually a very deep stage, and I experienced a very similar thing to you. Is that even though I sort of grew up in the green culture in Southern California, I didn't really embody it or integrate it very deeply. And really, when I started doing business and personal development, I was really at orange. I was very materialistic. I wanted success. I wanted money. I wanted sex and these sorts of things. And I spent a good 5-10 years doing that, sort of exhausting myself on that until I saw the limitations of that. And that's what happens with each of these stages, is that you if you work hard on it for 5 or 10 years, eventually you exhaust it. You sort of you start to master it. You start to familiarize yourself with it. You get comfortable with it, and then you get so comfortable that it gets boring, and you start asking yourself, well, what's next? There has to be more to life. I'm not just satisfied, earning money and having sex. I need something more. And then you can discover the next stage, and then start the whole process all over again. But yeah, what I realize is that every one of these stages is much deeper than we think, and that no matter how high you think you are on the spiral, you will benefit from going backwards and integrating even the very low stages, like even stage red. Sometimes it's appropriate to get angry and to know how to use your anger in a healthy way, not a toxic way, or how to be dominant. Dominance is not just a negative quality. There are positive, healthy aspects to dominance. For example, with leadership and so forth, it can be effective. Also, it depends on what environment you're in. Like if you're surviving in a prison environment, you're going to need a lot of red. Oh boy, you want to learn red? Go to prison for a few years. Try surviving in prison, and you will have a much deeper appreciation of stage red.
Hope that you guys enjoyed that clip. If you want to see more like this and have us do more podcasts, we are 100% funded by our generous patrons. And if you'd like to contribute, there's a link in the description, and we'll have one pop up on the screen right here so that we can do more podcasts where we have fun conversations and hopefully some deep ones like this. Either way, hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.